a little like foil cover, then you could just throw it on the ground. Dogs could eat it. Children could cut themselves. Jimmy Buffett gets his stuff stuck in his flip-flop. Not great. So people are like, let's fix that. One person named Daniel Kudzik fixed it. And it's pretty fucking genius. It's like a little piece of aluminum on the top that opens up this pressurized can. Which like is easy to take for granted, but then I found out the physics of it, and I was like, I have to tell the nerds. Here I am telling you nerds. This is actually 2 levers in one, okay? The one that we probably know more commonly is a first-class lever. This is the one that depresses the little drinking perforated area, the wide mouth. But before it is a first-class lever, it is a second-class lever. It is lifting this little rivet right in here. That's the thing that goes, and that is like the genius part of it. Because it vents the can, which allows us to then press in that perforated area. Without that, you ain't gonna open it. I've tried. Doesn't work. And it's super simple, but it's like so fucking elegant. And I'm just like, engineers, damn it. You guys are good. It's all thanks to this guy, Daniel Kudzik. That's your Nerd Minute. Are you guys ready for tonight's tremendous Nerd Night? Yes, you are. Yes, you are. For those of you in the back, we still got a few seats up front. You're welcome to come and join them. We have a wonderful show here tonight. Who's here their first Nerd Night? Yes, welcome. You chose a good one, an excellent one. First up, we're going to hear from Emily. She's going to talk about women soldiers during the Civil War. Next up, we're going to hear about Zach, who's talking about ghost particles and the ice cube neutrino detector in the South Pole. And last but not least, Rob's going to come up and tell us about a microscope that might save the world and possibly ruin himself. It's possible that the third one will have like a little therapy session at the end. It's good. It's going to be a good one though. I'm really excited. So if you haven't been here before, to my newbies, this is how this works. These people are going to come up on stage. They're going to talk about these things that they're super passionate about. We're going to learn a few things, have a few laughs. At the end of that, we'll have some time for questions. And then we'll have a little intermission. That's 15, 20 minutes to chat with your friends. Go ahead and get a drink at the bar. Go outside. Whatever you got to do. Then you come back here and we do it all over again. And if, hypothetically, someone's presenting and you're like, ooh, that's a really interesting subject that person just posed. I have a question about that. Does anyone know what we do when we have a question? You tweet it! Thanks. Participate in the question quest. This is how we get our questions here at Nerd Night from my newbies. You tweet them to @NerdNightMadison. I'll come up on stage afterwards. I'll read them. I'll have a microphone. Everyone can hear. It works great. And then as a reward, I will provide someone with a free beverage, perhaps one with a second and first class lever on it. Do you guys like beverages with second and first class levers on them? Yes you do. Well, I think we should probably get started then. Oh yeah, to my man who said that. All right, so first up tonight, we have a presenter. Her name is Emily. She is a Civil War reenactor. She is a lifelong queer nerd, and she is the editor of Our Lives magazine. And she's got an awesome topic for you on women in the Civil War. Nerds of Madison, put your hands together for Emily!
That is Civil War reenactor by the German art students, a local band, by the way. I was so happy when I first heard that song. I was like, it's about me. So hi, I'm Emily, and my pronouns are she, her. I am a big old queer mo, and amazingly did not realize that until much later than that photo was taken. So that's approximately, it's either 12 or 13 years old. I could look at the date and figure that out, but bet. I used to do Civil War reenacting. I no longer do it. It's a very expensive hobby, and when you're paying your own rent and making your own way in life, it becomes a little more difficult to do things like this. Also, I play roller derby, which is very expensive, so like one thing at a time. But back in the day, I got really interested in reenacting because it was this wonderful combination of acting and what some people might know as LARPing, and history, which I was a big geek for, and cool uniforms, which I was super into, plus like playing at Battle and War and camping, but without the death and dismemberment or disease and malaria. So what's not to like? I got into it primarily, here's my root. Oh yes, glory. I was too young to truly appreciate Denzel or Morgan Freeman at the time, but in retrospect, but this movie was actually very pivotal. So it came out in 1989, and I remember seeing it as a young person and being enthralled by the story. So this particular movie talks about the 54th Massachusetts, which was one of the first, what was then referred to as colored units, but predominantly African American, mostly freed people and former slaves. And it tells their story in addition to the white dude who was the commander of the regiment, because back in the day, they didn't let anybody but white folks lead those units. Problematic, whole other conversation. Anyway, so this movie like triggered something in me. I was like, this is really fascinating. This is really interesting history. And as a kid, I didn't fully grasp all of the nuances, but I knew that this was interesting. And also at the time, my best friend, her older brother, was a Civil War reenactor. So he would show up at the house sometimes in his uniform, and I was like, that is a cool uniform. I want to wear that. Again, I had no idea that I was a big old queer. But I liked the uniform, which, I mean, you don't have to be queer to do this, by the way, but
it helps.
It helps. You are correct. So, fast forward, 1991. This is about the time that I actually start reenacting. I had moved to Northern Illinois. I had a good friend, Charles, and his dad was really interested in this, so he formed a unit that I got to join. Oh yes, I brought props.
Woo! Yes!
This is my old hat for the 8th Illinois, Company E, dismounted cavalry, because I didn't have a horse. Horses are expensive. But cavalry got to have way better guns, and cooler uniforms, I thought. So I started reenacting about age 11, 12, and I got to do it a lot in Northern Illinois. I actually got to travel to Gettysburg and reenact on the site of the battle there, and it was very exciting. We got poured on and had to cancel the battle because it wasn't safe. But unbeknownst to me, I had no idea about this. I just knew I wanted to be there, I wanted to do this, I wanted to wear the uniform. I was basically passing as a boy. I took on the persona of a boy. I didn't have a lot of trouble passing for a boy at this age. I still don't entirely have that trouble, which, again, a whole other conversation. But I didn't know that there was this legacy that I was playing into. I was just really excited to be there and to learn about this stuff. The legacy was current and it was also very old. So at the same time that I was doing this reenactment and I was fielding questions from these like middle to late age dudes with pot bellies claiming that I was inauthentic and shouldn't be there when they found out I was a girl. And I was like, no, I'm, whatever, I'm more authentic than you. But I didn't even know that there was this whole legacy of women who actually did exactly what I was doing. Someone who did know that at the time was Lauren Cook. So in 1991, Lauren Cook had been reenacting with a unit of Union soldiers. So that's the North, that's us, the good guys, I will unequivocally say. She was at Antietam, which is this very critical battle in the war. They were doing a reenactment there, and a National Park Service officer found out that she was a woman who was in a reenactment unit and kicked her out and said, you are banned from doing this. You are banned from reenacting. You are banned from doing this impersonation work because this just didn't happen. And she was like, fuck you, dude. You're wrong. And took them to court, and over a couple of years in a court case, won the right to reenact and undid that decision by the National Park Service. I had no idea this was happening at the time, but in retrospect, I'm like, cool. So Lauren Cook went on to co-author this book on the left, They Fought Like Demons. So there are a few comprehensive books that sort of research the women who actually did dress and pass as men in the Civil War and fight. They did this on both sides, Union and Confederate. So she teamed with Deanne Blanton, who's another really amazing scholar, and created this book. And there's a couple other ones that did the same research. And they dug into all kinds of first-person records and newspaper reports from the time, journals, and also the few first-person accounts we have from the women and otherwise perhaps identified people who did this and created these. And I sadly did not discover this until much later in life as I got more and more interested in like what was the history here. But they're fascinating readings. So thanks to Lauren Cook, I was able to get a better sense, well, and all these other people, get a better sense of this history that I didn't initially realize I was paying homage to. I just knew that it was something I wanted and had to do. And I feel this special sort of connection now because this was something that these people at that time, in much harder circumstances than 12-year-old me in like reasonably middle-class Northern Illinois had to deal with, felt that they needed to do for a wide variety of reasons. So then you get me here tonight yapping at you all about it, because I frequently yap at my friends and loved ones about it. So, conservative estimates of female soldiers in the Civil War, somewhere between 400 and 750. It's difficult to pinpoint the exact number for obvious reasons. A lot of them never revealed what they did, were never discovered. There are a lot of accounts from the battlefields of people who were going around and checking, grave digging essentially, and taking care of the dead bodies, who would occasionally find a body. They're like, oh, this is a female-bodied human. And we never know anything about that person. There's just occasional accounts of that. But through all the research that people have done over the years, we've been able to sort of get these numbers. And there's a couple of them that are really prominent because they wrote letters or they left specific records, and two women in particular who wrote books after the fact about their experience, which is fascinating. Why though? So the Civil War, 1861 to 1865, in the middle of the sort of Victorian age, as we would call it, very kind of conservative, cover your ankles, very, very strict gender roles. Well, you can imagine some of the reasons someone might do this, but they were really varied across the board. Some women joined because they were literally just following boyfriends, husbands, or even family members and wanted to be near them, and they would pass and come along because you spent a long time out on the march or training with very little connection or communication, and mail took forever, and there was no internet, obviously, so bring along your people. So that some women did it for that reason. There were just as many women who did it because joining the army, getting paid $13 a month, woo! That was a big deal back in the day. There weren't a lot of jobs open to women. You couldn't really go and make a living. If you were from particularly like a low-income, working-class, rural, farming family, and we're going to get to someone who was sort of the eldest and felt responsible for her family. She's like, I can't make any money for you unless I pretend to be a man and get jobs that men are allowed to have and send this money home. So that was part of it. And then there were women who wanted to serve the cause. They wanted to serve the Union, just like any of the men who joined up. There were ones who wanted to escape bad home life situations. And there were some that, though we can't say identified in a particular way because those words and those concepts did not exist back then, lived the rest of their lives as men and weren't discovered until they died in an old soldier's home. So a lot of different reasons for this sort of thing. How? This is always the interesting question. It's like, how on earth do you join an army unit where you are sharing a tent together, you are drilling together, you're in these intense situations together, you gotta figure out how to pee, how to deal with your menstrual cycle if you've got it, all of this stuff. How did you do it? Well, here's the thing. In the 1800s, the military, to join up, not terribly strict. The physical that was often given to people to join up was, I'm gonna look at your eyes, I'm gonna look at your teeth, I'm gonna give you a firm handshake, you're gonna tell me that you're 18 years or older, and you're in. That's it. You don't have to take your clothes off, nothing. So not particularly difficult to hide whatever you need to hide at that point. Also, lots of really young people served in that war. The oldest on record is that 11-year-old Johnny Clam over there on the left, who has a pretty badass story. And look at that picture where it's like not quite nearly as big as his musket. Yikes. Johnny Clam was awarded a silver medal for heroism in battle. He was a drummer boy, actually, didn't actually carry a rifle, but he managed to fend off a Confederate that was coming at him by picking up a gun and shooting his ass. Oh, no 11-year-old should have to do that. And you have a number of examples of that. So I really like the story of Orion Perseus Howe, which, by the way, what a name. You are destined for greatness. He was 14, another drummer. That was a very common position they would give to people that they knew were definitely really young, even though technically you had to be 18, they'd make you a drummer. And he also received the Congressional Medal of Honor because he was injured while trying to run this errand for General Sherman, who you might know for his famous March to the Sea. He was trying to retrieve ammunition in the middle of a firefight and got injured, so he got an award. So, because there were so many very young people on both sides, Union and Confederate, people didn't really think twice about someone who, say, didn't have a lot of facial hair, or was a little short, or had a higher voice. But let's be real, they're also just kind of dumb. If you're wearing pants and you got short hair, you must be a dude. This is something I have personal experience with. Norms have not entirely changed since the Victorian era about what is considered passing, but it didn't even occur to most men, or let alone most women, that a female-bodied person would do this, that they were even capable of joining the army and pulling off what needed to be pulled off to do that, was outside of their reality entirely. So you really benefited from all these stupid stereotypes and preconceived notions. You could just join up and no one would guess. Also, at the time, there's all these really wonderful photographs of like the dudes posed with each other, like touching, loving on each other, lots of bromance. And I'm really sad that that's gone out of fashion over time in our particular culture. It's like men should be able to have these relationships with each other and touch one another without it necessarily being sexual or meaning it. It's just like you love each other and you should have connection, and that's a whole other conversation I want to have with you. But I love these pictures. So if you were someone who had joined up and you were sharing a tent with your husband, but pretending not to be related, no one would have looked twice at you for being maybe a little touchy-feely, a little affectionate with each other. By the way, the word homosexual was not coined for several decades after the Civil War. And the thing is, when you don't have words to describe something, it often means no one's even really thinking about it unless they're doing it. So no one notices, it's kind of invisible. That's why words are kind of important. So, we move on. Who were these women? We have so many to choose from, but I'm going to feature a couple who are very prominent, that there's a lot of awesome first-person primary resources about, because their stories are fascinating. And we're gonna go across here, and you'll notice Harriet Tubman at the end there. Harriet Tubman did not pass as a man, but she didn't need to be a badass. She does some cool ass shit, and we're gonna get to her at the end. So she's got like a kind of a cool asterisk next to her name, but I want to talk about it. So we're gonna start with Jenny Hodgers, who I'm going to refer to as Albert Cashier, and I'm going to use he, him pronouns, because Albert Cashier, once joining the army, lived the rest of his life as a man. And I'm going to respect that regardless of, I'm not going to assume one way or the other how he would identify if we had modern terms for it. I'm just going to go with what he did for the rest of his life. So Albert's story is really neat. He was an Irish immigrant, as many people who served in the war, especially in the North, were immigrants from Ireland and Germany and other places. But he joined up pretty young. I believe he was like, do math for me off the top of my head, 16, 17, something like that, in Illinois. joined the infantry. He ended up serving for 3 years through 40 major battles. Survived, which is an accomplishment in itself at the time. Got through the whole thing. And was noted as being the shortest man in his regiment. Was 5'3", and was sometimes referred to as the regimental wife, without any irony or knowledge of what was actually happening, which I love. But was referred to as a very able rifleman, narrowly escaped capture by the Confederates at Vicksburg, which was this huge campaign that happened in Grant's army when they were trying to basically split the Confederacy in two by taking Vicksburg, which was this sort of linchpin on the Mississippi River. Was nearly captured, and I love this, was reported to have taken the rifle from the Confederate who was trying to capture him and beaten him senseless with it. Pretty badass. So he serves honorably through the entire war, gets mustered out with the rest of the unit, goes on to just hold odd jobs in Illinois, just does kind of whatever work is around, considered kind of a loner. I wonder why. Some of this is like very bittersweet when I look at it. You're just thinking about, man, you know, even now how hard this would be and how hard this is for some folks, but what a lonely life, but was so determined to live that life. That was the important thing. So he's in Illinois, he's doing work, gets older. In about 1910, he's picking up sticks, like clearing the estate of an Illinois senator. And that Illinois senator has himself a brand new car he's real excited about. And he's pulling that car out of the driveway and doesn't notice the 5'3" figure of Albert Cashier picking up sticks and runs him over, breaks his leg. Doesn't kill him, breaks his leg. And over the course of dealing with this medical emergency, realizes that Albert is female-bodied, is what we're gonna call it. And Albert pleads with the senator not to reveal his secret. And the senator, to his credit, agrees and keeps it secret. Unfortunately, medical practice is being pretty shitty at the time. Albert does not recover very well, and the injury dogs him for several months before he has to be admitted to an old soldier's home. But to get admitted to an old soldier's home, you have to go through all these like court processes and get official whatever recognition. And in the course of that, someone spills the beans to the press. So Albert is outed. And that's the picture you see there from the newspaper. Woman soldier in the 95th Illinois. Picture during the war, picture much later. And to their credit, they don't list his old name, but the newspapers loved shit like that this time. The positive side is that we have this record, we have interviews with and accounts of some of these people because of the newspapers, but I can't imagine it felt good at the time. So Albert gets outed. However, he does get admitted to this old soldier's home. The downside is that they force him to wear dresses. And he refuses for a long time, but he finally gives in because you're old and you've been injured and you just need help. And you're like, fine, you motherfuckers, I will wear a dress. Doesn't mean anything. But it is this, again, this very sort of bittersweet ending to this amazing life. And Albert passes away in 1915 in the old soldier's home after being made, but gets to be buried in his Union uniform with full military honors, which is great. But we're going to get to why that sort of thing happens and how interesting this was. So we go to Sarah Rosetta Wakeman, aka Lyons Wakeman, who was another person who served with the New York Volunteer Infantry. So Lyons Wakeman is an interesting case. It's the only known case where we actually have letters written by Lyons, Sarah, to home during the war, which is amazing. Like, this didn't happen. So Lyons was from a pretty rural farming community in Pennsylvania. He could write and read. It's like not well punctuated or grammar's not great, but it's like a first-hand account from this sort of regular everyday soldier who had already left home and started passing as a man to work on a coal barge because he needed she needed to make, I think she identified as she the entire time, she needed to make money to send home to her family. And she sends all these letters home with her own name, because another fun fact, there was no censorship of Civil War mail at the time. They didn't look at them, and they didn't care if you gave away battle locations, because by the time the mail got back to the person you were sending it to, it was like 3 weeks, a month later, whatever. So it's a really fascinating account, and a lot of it's just very regular stuff, just like asking after the farm, and like, I'm gonna send you money, and I'm sorry for how things were left. But you never really know what that was, because people in the Victorian age are just as withholding as modern Midwesterners. Who knows? Something happened at home. But she was the oldest child in her family and wanted to send money home. So she served for a couple of years, and then unfortunately she got sent down on the Red River campaign is what it was called, ends up in New Orleans and contracts some sort of terrible camp disease and gets like chronic diarrhea and dies in New Orleans. This is really common for soldiers at the time. The majority of casualties in the Civil War were due to disease, not battle death, because medicine at the time sucked. And, because I'm a nerd, when I was in New Orleans recently, I found Lyons Wigman's grave, because he was buried under that name in a soldier's graveyard, and someone had already left the little flower there. There was not one in any of the other graves, but someone had found that. And I wanted to make a point to find that grave, because this is sort of this touchstone with this cool piece of history, and this amazing thing that this person did. I got a little emotional about it. It's a big deal. All right, we're gonna move to Emma Edmonds. She's fascinating. So Franklin Thompson was the name that she took on. She was Canadian, but came on down and ended up joining up Michigan with the 2nd Michigan Infantry. She was escaping. She left at age 16 because her dad was a son of a bitch and was an abusive home life, and had set up this arranged marriage, and she was like, fuck no, I'm out of here. So she left, and she took on a male persona and became a door-to-door book salesman, because that was a thing you could do back then to make money at. And she was very good at it. And so the recruiters came along when the war broke out, and she was like, I'm gonna go do that. So she joined the army, and she served for several years before she got malaria. Oof, no fun. But she served, she was mostly worked as a nurse, a hospital attendant, a stretcher bearer, occasionally as an infantry person, actually like firing a weapon and fighting. Did a lot of mail carrying and messenger work, so that's like hundreds of miles of riding to deliver mail. And then as a messenger, her shit got fucked up in a battle because they ran out of horses, and she had to ride a mule who threw her into a ditch, and she broke her leg and had some internal injuries, and she suffered from that for the rest of her life. Because again, want to reiterate, medical care at the time sucked. So when she got malaria several years into the war, she couldn't seek medical care for fear of being discovered. So she left. She disappears. And Franklin Thompson gets written down in the records as a deserter. Boo. But she goes on, she joins the, I think it's called the Christian Commission as a nurse, and continues to serve throughout the war helping with the wounded. Afterwards, she gets married, she has 3 kids, they die because it's the 1800s and things suck. She adopts some kids, and in the 1870s, she actually attends a reunion of her military unit as herself. And all these guys are like, holy shit! I had no idea! But they're cool. They're like, yeah, right on, you were a great soldier, welcome. And this is the difference between most of the public and all of the men. The vast majority of them who served with these people will go to bat for them and say, they served honorably. This person was great. I support them. Turns out having personal experience makes a difference. It shouldn't, but it does. So, dealing with all of this chronic injury left over from the war, feeling bad about being left with this deserter status, Sarah Emma Edmonds writes a book about her service, trying to make money to support her kids, and then petitions the U.S. Congress to have her name cleared of the desertion status, and to be given a military pension for her service. It takes 8 years and all of the backing of the various people that she served with, and she fucking does it. She is awarded a military pension. I believe she is the first woman in US history to be given one. The book is fascinating, I highly recommend it. So Harriet Tubman, let's talk about her for a second. How many of you all have seen the drunk history about Harriet Tubman? It's mostly accurate. It's mostly accurate. So I wanted to throw her in here because, for obvious, sad reasons, a black woman was not going to be able to pass as a man and serve in the army. There were some colored units, African American units in the war, but it was not nearly remotely as approachable. But Harriet Tubman was amazing, and I really want someone to make a fucking series about her, not just a movie. She needs a whole series to tell her life story because it's amazing. But I'm going to focus on one thing in particular. She was responsible for leading what was called the Combahee River Raid. She was the first woman, the only woman, and certainly the only African American woman in the 19th century to be given charge of a military unit to lead a mission. Not only that, but it was one of the only missions with the explicit purpose of liberating refugee slaves. No other purpose. That was it. What she had to do was wander down into the Carolinas, into this part in South Carolina, make friends with people who spoke largely a language she didn't speak. So previous to this, she'd worked the Underground Railroad, mostly freeing family members from another part of the South. People that she knew, that she had connections to. People were like, well, she was a black person. She could make friends with any black person. No big deal, it's easy. Not actually the case, because no one is a monolith. So the folks in this part of South Carolina largely spoke a language called Gullah. She didn't speak it. So she had to figure out how to pass unnoticed in a part of the world where no one knew her, and she would stand out like a sore thumb to any plantation owners who were looking to capture people and shit. She talked to them and she figured out where the mines had been laid in the river by the Confederacy and arranged for people to be ready when she led this contingent of 2 Union gunboats. I've been drinking up the river and be ready to come out. So not only that though, when she leads these boats up, and the boats are mostly populated by a Union regiment that are another unit of African American troops. So this is amazing. I can just imagine all these fucking sad racist slaveholders seeing this black folks in uniform coming to fuck with you. It's so good. She has to sit on the bow of the boat though and sing a song, the specific song that was the sort of key, the trigger to let people know it was time to come out of hiding, come to the shore, and get on these boats. In the middle, and shortly into this, the Confederates and the folks in the plantations figured out what was happening and started to fire at them. So this is in the middle of cannons and rifles and shit. And she's out there singing. Because she's amazing. And they rescue something like 750 human beings. Get them out of the boats and get them out of there. Because these were folks who were so far behind enemy lines and had so little resources available to them they couldn't necessarily get up to the north or to Canada on their own. It's this huge mission. And yeah, so she has this amazing distinction. She, in addition to that, helped free somewhere between 70 and 100 people on the Underground Railroad. And lived to be 91 years old. Despite having been horribly crippled early in life, when she was still enslaved, another person was trying to escape, and the owner, in his fury, threw some sort of heavy lead weight across the room, missed the person he was aiming for, and beamed Harriet Tubman in the head. Major head injury. She suffered seizures for the rest of her life, and did all of this. It's fucking awesome. So I put her in this category of just women doing amazing shit in the Civil War at a time when everything was pitted against you. 7th Wisconsin Infantry, our local heroes, part of what was called the Iron Brigade, because this brigade of Wisconsin and Michigan regiments were some of the best, most tenacious fighters in the war, because we were the Westerners then, we were frontiers people, badass. Somewhere in this picture, can't pick it out, there is a woman in uniform. A young girl by the name of Rebecca Peterman, who was from Ellensboro, Wisconsin, ran away from home at age 15 and joined up. She served for 2 years, got mustered out, tried to rejoin, they figured it out, became a huge press sensation. There are interviews with her. I have read them in the microfiche at the Wisconsin Historical Society about why she left and why she did it. She's very cagey. But she does say that when she went home between the first service and the second one, trying to rejoin, her parents tried to put her back in a dress, she said. And she said, fuck no, I'm out of here. And she left. She tried to rejoin, didn't happen, and then she disappears from the historical record entirely. And I may or may not be writing a novel based on her life, but I'm just gonna throw that in as well. So there's like big and small stories all over the place about these women, and it's fantastic. I want to note too, like all these wonderful accounts from other people who served with them at the time. There's two favorites. There were a number of women who went in camp, who were dressed as men in passing, and no one noticed that they were women until they gave birth in camp. Somehow, no one noticed. And I love it because the accounts of this in the letters and the diaries of the time are very, I have to imagine, super tongue-in-cheek dry. One fella, an officer in a Union unit, said, "One of our sergeants just gave birth in what is clearly a major violation of military law." Yes. Another one commented, "If this keeps up," or it was, "One of the men just gave birth to a fine, healthy baby boy, and if this keeps up, we won't have to recruit any more men." And that was largely the attitude by so many of the people who served with them. It's fascinating. And I want to go back to like, when you're in this situation and all the things you have to do to hide and to maintain, and just all these societal attitudes that played into it and made it possible. But the incredible physical toll it must have taken. So it was really hard for the dudes. This was not an easy time to serve. You were marching hundreds of miles in really shitty shoes that I have worn, with zero arch support. You were being asked to walk in a line into cannons. Just walk at them, because that's gonna work. The medicine at the time was maybe if you were lucky, you would be given some ether to dull your pain, but most likely you were not going to get anything. There was no understanding of disease or where germs happened, so like the camps would have these open sinks that you were supposed to piss and shit in. So it was not looked down upon if you were like, that's gross, I'm going to go into the woods by myself and relieve myself in private, so no one had to see anything, because that was just less disgusting, generally. But I imagine these women, and otherwise potentially identified humans, dealing with this. They wanted to be there. You imagine the alternative was to stay home, to bear children at the whim of someone else usually, have no access to meaningful work, all of the things that came with this oppressive society at the time. And you're like, I would rather risk my ass in this hard, horrifying situation and have a chance to make some money and to serve this cause I believe in and to get out and have adventure. It's an amazing thing. Really think about it. So I think about the legacy of these hundreds of women. So hundreds of women in a war that saw millions participate. And the casualty count was over 600,000 people. This number of women didn't turn the tide of a battle. It didn't turn the tide of the war. But their contributions on an individual level were huge. And they made an impact in the public consciousness. And they ended up in newspaper stories. And they wrote books. And we've just been discovering more of them now as we look back into the historical record. This is shit I was never taught in school. And I wish I was. Because it makes me feel so much more tied to the event. And it's like movies like Glory and learning about Harriet Tubman and what that does, and much more, but what that does for people of color to have some ownership of like, this is your history. This war just wasn't about generals making dubious to good decisions and getting a bunch of people killed. This was about people seeking out their own means of liberation. Because Abraham Lincoln may have signed the Emancipation Proclamation, but African American people were already making their own freedom before that happened. And they did so during the war, and they did so afterwards. And these women did the same thing. They didn't wait to be given permission. Albert Cashier, in his later life, voted long before women were given the vote. So they pioneered women's open service in the military, proving beyond a shadow of a doubt that under the worst of circumstances we could do this shit, let alone being able to live as ourselves and have accommodations appropriate to ourselves. They were pioneers for equal rights for women. A lot of them went on to become suffragettes, or not, but to inspire the suffragettes. Be like, look, we have these examples. Emancipation and African American liberation and rights. We talked about that with Harriet Tubman, but there were a lot of people who were doing this work. And there's a lot of good reading on that if you want to hit me up. I have recommendations. Queer pioneers. I couldn't leave that out. Again, there was no terminology for it at the time. There's no way to say for sure that anybody was queer or transgender. These words did not exist at the time. There was very little sense of it, and I don't want to presume for anybody how they would have identified. But in the broader sense of how I define queer as being something that is other than the status quo, normal, expected gender, sexuality, whatever, absolutely. They were way out ahead they were just living their lives. They were just doing what they felt was right for themselves, and I think that's the most powerful thing. It wasn't political necessarily, it was just, this is how I need to live, and that's huge. And living your life on your own terms. I got ahead of myself in my slideshow. So back to little 13-year-old me. I didn't know at the time, and I had, again, far lower consequences and stress involved. But fending off all of these people who were telling me that I was wrong, that I shouldn't be there, that I had no right, that I was inauthentic. There's this really awful term, this slang term in reenactors called to be a farb, which means like something fucking unauthentic, reenacting bastard. They hold you to high standards in terms of your uniform and your personification. And I was not that. I was far more authentic than so many of the people who did it at the time. But I didn't know. I just knew that I needed to be there, and this was something that I was fascinated by and felt interesting and right. And so I did it. And as I've gotten older and looked into the history, I realized that I'm not alone, and that I wasn't even first, and that I have all these amazing examples to look back at and say, these are my ancestors and my foremothers and for otherwise identified, and they have contributed enormously to our history and our current situation. And we need to know these stories, and I will advocate for this up and down until I am dead and gone. We need to know these historical stories, and we need to think about them and dig into them, because history is not set. That also blew my mind, historical theory as a concept. It's like, oh right, yeah, because it depends on who it's coming from, right? Who's telling the story. This stuff is important, and it makes a big difference in terms of how we see ourselves now and where we know we can go. and what's already been done. So that's about all I gotta say about this, but I have so many more stories and experiences. But I'm really glad I got to just talk at you about this, because I do this a lot to friends and loved ones, like I said, and they put up with it very admirably, because I'm really excited about it and I want to tell stories, and there's a lot of really good stories. So I'm happy to answer questions or talk later if you want referrals, and if you keep your eye out, and I'm very lucky, there might be a novel in the near future that actually gets published.
Give it up for Emily!
Thank you.
Alright, so we don't have time for questions.
Did I run over my time?
Just maybe double.
You gotta start waving at me, dude.
Yeah, I know. I felt very
I'm too
wrong.
terrible. I'm
And
so
everyone was so
sorry.
interested. But it's okay, because Emily, you're gonna stick around?
I'll be around.
Okay, she'll be
I'm
up
so
here.
sorry.
She'll be listening. She'll be ready to answer some questions. We'll take a brief little break. Guys, grab some drinks, and we'll see you back shortly. Give it up one more time for Emily.